because I've been wanting to talk to you about the anti-misogyny arc for a long time. And I feel like I actually have a lot of thoughts about essentially like how do we achieve this on like the internet, particularly in a political space that is like pretty dominantly masculine. I think there's an intention within DGG, from what I can tell, from what you say and what people say, to make women feel comfortable in this space. Is that correct?
There's an intention from me. There's probably an intention from part of my community, but I would say it's probably a minority.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Careful. There's differences in words, though. I would say less than 15 or 20% want to make women feel comfortable. I'd say probably 50 to 80% of them want women to feel comfortable. But there's a difference between wanting to help people feel comfortable versus just wanting them to be comfortable, right?
Okay. Just a heads up, LonerBox is going to drop in too, because I know he was interested in talking to you. More specifically, did you hear about stuff in Ohio?
Yeah. What? I don't know. That's a really vague question.
Okay.
Did I hear about stuff in Ohio? Yeah, go ahead.
So there was obviously not a lot of women that came.
Yeah, that's true of most of our campus events.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is something that I think everyone is going to think that I'm attacking you specifically over, and it's not. It's something that I think is common to the political space and common to the internet as well, because it's such a masculine space. And so my question is, how do we make women legitimately feel more welcome? There's a couple of things that I see as like a breaking point. You can make women feel welcome, but then they stay for like a month or two and then they feel uncomfortable and then they leave and never come back, right? So you need women to feel comfortable enough to come and comfortable enough to stay, which are kind of like two separate problems. So how do you attempt to tackle the first one?
I think when we frame this problem, I think there's a couple things that we have to think about. So I think that the first question that you have to think about is what is the natural composition of this space?
Yes, definitely. Which is like probably 80% male, if not 85. Would you guess?
My guess, if I had to guess, my guess would be that the overall composition of this space is, it depends on how much we broaden it or versus...
I mean, there's two things to tackle because this space is an intersection of internet and politics, right? So you've got like two intersections making it probably more masculinized by nature.
Yeah. For the online political sphere, I'll draw two broadly different things.
Can you do the background in black?
No.
Please?
I don't do that.
Cringe.
I would do two broadly different spheres. So on this one here, I might call this like the YouTube essayist / progressive streamer or whatever circle.
Can you write that there?
Yeah.
Just assume my memory is really bad. Okay, so that's like video essayists and YouTube in general.
I would say this is like this is all politics. So all of this is politics. But I would say this is going to be like video essayists and just like non-combative people. Yeah. So I'd say like maybe people like Hassan that don't do like all the debate stuff, but just kind of like cover stuff on stream.
So you're putting Hassan in, sorry.
So I'd be putting
camp?
like Hassan. Yeah, I'd be putting people like Hassan here in video essayists because they tend to be non-combative.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Okay, so like non-combative politics and
yeah.
then combative debate perverts.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say over here, this would be like combative spaces.
Okay.
I think that for online for online content, I would say that the more combative your space is, probably this skews way, way, way more masculine.
Right.
So when we go to videos over here, I think a lot of like, especially like the progressive video essayists, I think that if you looked at their stuff, the less combative it is, just as a very broad thing, you probably start to see really, really, really shocking amounts of women here, like 40, 50% possibly.
So not just not combative, but I think specifically there's like this air that I feel like leftist video essayists get that is very like smug, passive aggressive, and like condescending. So they're never combative, they'll never fight you, but they will talk about people that they disagree with in like a like holier than thou and smug kind of way. Like it feels very passive aggressive.
It might be. I don't know if that plays into it as much though. I think different people can be passive aggressive. I don't know if that would necessarily draw women to it, like that, the passive aggressive temperament. I just think it's more to do with like the less combative stuff.
I guess I see passive aggression as like fundamentally more socialized feminine. So when I say feminine, obviously I understand that men can be feminine and blah, 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 all the like caveat. But I see like how our society views the feminine, passive aggression falls into there, which I think in large part, like if a space in my mind, if a space represents what our society calls a femininity, is going to naturally make probably most likely women and more feminine people feel most comfortable because they're probably drawn to that. They're socialized into that, blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
Do you agree?
That's a take. I don't think I agree, though.
Okay.
I think that if women are drawn to it, I don't think it's because of passive aggressiveness. Like, I think that even if these people were to be like...
I don't think it's passive aggression alone, just to be clear.
Sure.
Yeah.
That might be a factor, maybe.
I think in general, this space captures more like what we would call feminine traits within it. Even the way that they talk about
that
things.
might be true.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
sure. That might be true. Yeah.
And so including when they do get combative or aggressive, it tends to express in like a passive aggressive way as well.
Yeah. The more combative and like internet, like wavy and confrontational a space is, I think that this tends to skew way more heavily masculine.
Yes.
Yes. With some exceptional carve-outs for subject matter. Subject matter, I think, could influence things quite a bit. So, for instance, for red pill audiences, it wouldn't surprise me if it started to skew more female than not, just because the subject matter is so related to women, because obviously it's about women, right? Or if there was like a really combative
like
makeup
topics.
reviewer, they would probably have, or whatever fucking women like it online or whatever, yeah.
Okay, so in part, but the topics that you cover aren't inherently masculine, except for, I would say, the red pill stuff, obviously.
Correct.
So then the question is, you cover electoral politics and foreign politics a lot, and yet I would suspect that we're still going to see a lot less women represented. I agree that if you were aggressively fighting about makeup and Roe v. Wade and stuff, you'd probably see more women trickle in because it obviously has a natural appeal to them.
Potentially, yeah.
But why are they not interested in coming into a combative space that's about gender neutral politics?
I just think that the combative, the very combative, masculine coded types of conversations, I just think are not very appealing to women in general.
Because of socialization, essentially?
I don't know why. I just don't think it's as appealing. I might be like laying on anecdote, but I can very easily see a guy talking to another guy and be like, holy shit, did you see this debate? This guy fucking crushes this dude.
Right.
But it's hard for me to imagine a woman saying the same thing, like, oh my God, like I watched this debate and this guy totally fucking destroyed this guy or whatever. I feel like the whole, the progeny of like, oh, that would be the right word, of like the older like internet kind of like brutal debating, insulting, slurs, all of this edgy behavior that kind of grew into this online combative blood sport stuff. All of this was like heavily male coded, heavily male beginning, and then it comes from
Gamergate, which is a more masculine like space, just in what it was.
And then I also think that you run into a lot of these social mechanisms where once something begins in a certain way too, it also gets heavily pushed in a certain way as well. So for instance, it might be that if there was a community where there were 10 combative male debaters and 10 combative female debaters, that community might skew like 40-60 like female male because it's coded more for masculine traits. But if it starts with like 1 female and 9 males, it might never grow past like 1%.
Right.
Because one woman stepping into a community of no women is brutal. One woman stepping into a community of 10 women sometimes is more brutal because there's like the queen shit and the pick me and everything.
There's like the internal misogyny.
But one woman stepping into a community with 50-50, it's just not only is it easier for the women to go in there because there's other women and it's not as big of a deal, the men also behave better because men are way more thirsty and way more autistic in communities where there are very, very few women as well.
Yes.
Like one of the issues I had in the past, and I'm just hands off with it now because I don't even know what the fuck to do with it. One of the issues that I had in the past is sometimes a lot of the otherizing behavior that happens in Discords, it's not even like moderatable or actionable behavior.
No.
It's just guys that are giving way too much attention to particular women and being just a little bit too much about it. But they're not like breaking a rule, but it's like,
they're not doing, like, this is exactly kind of, I think, what happened in Ohio, right? So there was a number of women that came and were like, there was probably like 5 women there. There was more than 5, but very few. Because I agree, women just generally seem to be not drawn to politics, which I actually think is fine and totally neutral.
Wait, say that again? You mean not drawn to this space or?
Not drawn to politics, like general electoral politics. There's less women that seem to be interested in the topic.
Oh, I don't know if that's the case. Because one of the comments that I get when a lot of political people show up to my events is they're surprised that we have so many young men doing politics because I think supposedly the canvassing space and volunteering space are usually...
It's always women.
But
that's across the board on everything. Women just volunteer more because...
Oh, But I mean, I think it's like
nice.
dramatically overrepresented when it comes to like canvassing and
Yes.
political, like 90% like women. I think it's, yeah.
I think that's because any like boots on ground voluntary work almost always is dominated by women, like regardless
Sure.
of what the voluntary work is, because men just don't seem to volunteer.
Okay.
So what?
So I just said there's self-reinforcing behavior from men that,
Yeah. So when I look at, so I think there's two, I'm trying to figure out how I want to organize this. There's kind of a couple thoughts that I have, which is a predilection in a community to view what society has called masculine things as more respect-worthy, more cool, and more like edgy. So you and I had this conversation a while ago where we talked about the masculine and the feminine. You're like, it sucks because like the feminine stuff is just like cringe and like nice, whereas like masculine stuff is like cool. Like you get to be cool.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I also feel like, I don't actually agree, although I think a lot of people would agree with you that they feel that way. So for example, even in the comments I'm seeing when we're talking about like what women might be more attracted to as far as topics, a bunch of people start screaming things like makeup and babies, right? Talking as though essentially, LonerBox is here?
Yeah, but I have to set up my...
Hi, Loner. Where were we? Okay, Ohio. Let's jump there because I know that Loner has specific thoughts about that. So in Ohio, there's a number of women that came up and were basically like, hey, I was really excited to be here. Love the community. Really excited to meet you guys. But it was a little uncomfortable because I basically like couldn't go anywhere or exist in any way without being like hit on constantly. To the point where it's like, obviously made them feel really uncomfortable. And so there's this interesting thing where, first of all, if there's, like, I think when we first think about that, a lot of people are like, oh, the boys were doing something bad. And it's like, guys finally like working up the gumption to try to like talk with a girl and flirt with her isn't bad. I don't ever want people to think that that's like not an okay thing to do. But at the same time, if we want to create a space where women feel like most comfortable, there has to be a trade-off of basically saying the men aren't doing anything bad, like no individual, but if there's 70 different individuals that approach you, it's pretty understandable why as a woman you'd be like, oh my gosh, I literally can't exist. Like I just can't be friends with people because it's like an open invitation. This is why compliments can sometimes suck, because it feels like it in and of itself becomes like an open invitation for men to like linger and kind of like expect something from you. And you're like, thanks for the compliment. Like appreciate you calling my hair nice, but also like, bye. Not that complimenting women is bad. And I don't think people should say that complimenting women or hitting on women is bad. And so the question is, in the community, so say for like future canvassing events, how do we make women, like what is the likelihood that a lot of those women will come back?
My imagine would be pretty low. That's why I'm saying that once you wind up with, once gender balance in an area gets heavily skewed, I think it's a really difficult thing to attract people, because even if the space is like okay, bringing in new people, like the dynamic, it's a self-reinforcing dynamic.
Yeah, it is. And so then essentially, if you're on a self-reinforcing dynamic, the only way to break it is to like kick yourself off the cycle. But I think social engineering is very, very tricky. And so you don't want to make like policies or decisions.
It's not really a policy thing, but the problem is if the people just aren't socialized around women, then they're not going to be socialized around women. And then when they see them, it just gets a little bit stupid. They're going to get more excited.
They're going to have like, hey, like, of course these guys are hitting on these girls. They're like obviously women that are interested enough in politics to come out, and all these guys are interested enough in politics, and they have a mutual interest in DGG. Like for the guys, they're like, these women are like, of course they're hitting on these girls. It's like probably exactly what they're looking for. So the question is, how do we not curb like what naturally occurs and like make anyone feel like they're bad for doing that, but also basically do a trade-off of like, how do we make women a little bit more comfortable so that they do come back? Because it's like, if you make a policy, like a social engineering policy that isn't punitive, but shifts like power maybe more in the favor of women, like Loner and I talked about Bumble Rules or something like that.
What are Bumble Rules?
It's where...
That was nice, yeah.
Do you want to explain it?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was going to say, like, you know, in Bumble, where only women can, like, start conversations with men. I think
like you're basically setting it up as like
your roof,
You're setting
it
up as like
if anyone's going to ask anyone out, it's got to be women asking men,
Yeah, but like making dating rules for... That just seems like such a...
We can't at a company level, right? Like...
No, I'm not talking about a company. I'm saying even at a canvassing event, like starting to make dating rules, like is already, I feel like, otherizing everybody so much. It makes you in such a weird position that like you're basically saying we're like not allowed to talk to women unless they talk to you first.
Well, you're not allowed to ask for dates or get their numbers.
Yeah, but I feel like the issue is
that.
people aren't like, I feel like the main issue when you're a woman isn't guys asking for dates or numbers. It's every guy wanting to sit next to you, or it's every guy wanting to sit next to you. It's guys like trying to talk to you. It's guys trying to ask you to go do things or blah, blah, blah. It will never be like an outward ask. It's just like all of the compounding pressure of like the little things that people are all pushing you towards, I think. Like if you just make the blanket rule of like, don't ask for a number, don't ask for a date, then people won't do that, but they'll still try to like sit next to them, talk with them, like all the getting closer and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it would be.
It depends on what the complaint was, doesn't it? Because I thought the complaint was specifically like people just like making proper like explicit advances. No.
That was my understanding, but obviously I didn't like sit them down and be like, give me explicit examples of what made you uncomfortable and what didn't make you uncomfortable. So part of it is like a lack of data. And I agree that it is super cringe, but I also, in my head, I go, I'm willing to do anything. I don't care. Which is like, is there a way to come up with a good idea that seems organic and to some degree facilitates women feeling more comfortable to some degree so that we have less attrition at minimum? And is it worth it? Like say it's like cringy by like 7%, but it increases retention of women attending events or coming to DGG or feeling comfortable in the space in general by 12%. Is that worth it?
I mean, I think it'd be worth it, but I have no idea what to do. I feel like the sexist, like, or the sexual divide problems, I don't know if anybody has made like a lot of headway in solving any of these things. It's a really hard, like racial stuff is solvable, LGBT stuff is solvable, but like male-female dynamics in group settings, I think are just really, 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 really hard. Right.
Because the worst thing is like making strict rules that don't work because you're right. Like the question of the Bumble Rule is like, guys, probably some of the most respectful guys will be like, oh, so I shouldn't talk to women. And then probably the least respectful guys that are like probably more likely the problem will be like, oh, so as long as I just linger around her long enough, maybe I'll convince her to ask me out on a date or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, like so even when I'm suggesting that, I don't think there's any like perfect answer. It's just that compared to, it seems like there's a problem already, and one that seems to be like affecting the women because they're the ones who are getting all the advances made on them. Like, at least from my personal experience, it seems to be that in general, men who are not used to speaking to women or asking them out and that kind of thing just seem to be so much better once that is not like a priority in their mind, like when they're just treating it like the same way that they would talk to a guy. And I feel like that just like relaxes things a lot more. But then the problem is obviously, oh, well, what if like there is actually some like interaction that might end up into being something like a date or something like that? And then I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. Because I feel like if a rule like that, like maybe it'll make things worse. I don't know how it can make things worse than like the situation you just described. So, or you could just say like, just don't, if it's a canvassing event, if it's you're there for the event, it's like, well, just don't ask out anyone at the event. But then again, that's like, people can do other things. I don't know.
Is Jakobokaj willing to come on? Because I feel like I don't fully understand what that idea is. But like,
so one of the things
I don't have a solution. I just
one of the things for military stuff basically is, because I've been looking at this for a long time. It's one of the things I looked at a long time ago. So for my understanding for the military and the United States military, like people think that like racial divides can never be solved, blah, 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 blah. But my understanding is racial integration in the United States Armed Forces is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
In terms of like breaking away all the racial divides, getting people to work cohesively as units, that's something that they've made like, I wouldn't say it's 100% solved, but I think it's like a pretty well done thing. However, I don't know if any progress has been made on integrating males and females into the same environments. I don't know if anything has gotten rid of like Jacob brought up like the queens, your army queens, or like the different ways that men treat women in units, or the inability to just see people as coworkers and friends without sexual dynamics being introduced. Like, and if the military hasn't solved it, it's one of those things where you look at the military, like when you look at, for instance, like sleep hacks. Well, if the military doesn't have a sleep hack, then there's probably not a good sleep hack. If there was, they'd be using it. I think if there was an easy way to integrate men and women together into units that was like, data driven and worked, the military would probably be doing it. And they seem to have not made great progress on it. I don't know, Jacob, you can speak to that if you want.
Yeah, I honestly don't have any great solutions. My example is like, even the military has a lot of issues with that. And I think the military has a lot more ability to like implement controls. And it probably also is selecting a little better. I don't really want to talk shit on canvassers, But like people who have committed to the military probably are having less issues with like women and thirstiness than like random canvassers for online stuff. But yeah, like deployment queens and like people getting pregnant on deployments and like just weird stuff happening is still an issue there.
Because for me, I don't really care if people meet the love of their life or even just somebody that they want to hook up. I don't give a f about any of that shit. Like, I'm fine with people dating. I'm fine with all that stuff. I'm even fine, like, it's a community. Boys and girls and they, thems, they're all going to f, they're all going to have drama. They're all going to fight with each other. Like, that stuff's normal. Because I don't really want to solve that question, which I think the military is a lot more angled towards solving. And maybe this is my naivety of like, if we don't solve that problem, we don't solve the latter problem. I don't see people wanting to fucking date and stuff a problem. What I see is women feeling like there isn't a community that they can exist within just as themselves, and not feel like constantly like having to navigate interpersonal levels beyond anything that would be normal in like a more naturally mixed co-ed group, like if there was 50-50 or like 40-60.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any problem with relationships either. The military stuff does try to select for that, but it also has issues with what you're talking about. I don't think there's any issue with what you're saying. I think you're entirely right. There's a lot of really weird shit that goes on with like just attention and like having these weird mixed dynamics, especially with just how dating and like gender roles seem to exist already, and then it being amplified by it kind of being like women being novel in the space and maybe also having men that are less socialized with women. It's just like a confluence of like a bunch of things all coming together that I'm just sitting on the sidelines. There's that really good quote where like the man who enters the arena is the good one, and I'm kind of just sitting here saying like, yeah, I don't know, it's cool that you're trying to do that, but I don't really have any solutions and I don't think yours will work.
Yeah, that's
so I think the Bumble thing,
yes,
I think the Bumble thing is like a pretty cool idea, but I don't think it solves the issue. Like if I'm talking to a girl and I say like, hey, can I get your Instagram? I think you're really cool. And she says no, and I move on. I don't think she's ever going to be bothered by that.
Right. Of course.
The issue is like all these puppy dog guys who will follow like women around and do this like soft flirting thing. And those people aren't really people you can ever like legislate out or like make rules to avoid, unless you're like having like almost like social awareness police where you just like aggressively shame people who are being fucking weirdos.
Yeah. Like I feel like the only way that you could even theoretically manage it, from what I'm hearing from you, would be some sort of like bottom up community type response. Like it can't be a rule from the top down, or it's just not going to work. It'll just be
you like literally almost have to like change the motivations and like how people respond to this, like in the like the Gillette commercial type thing. You have to do almost something like that, and it has to work.
Hey bro, stop being so toxically masculine.
Like just stop being fucking weird. And like it's really hard to do because like a lot of people, like when you're flirting, often it is kind of like uncomfortable and weird too. And like the line for where it's okay and where it isn't is really hard.
It's super hard. It's super, super hard. And especially if you have anyone know like autism, it's going to be even harder for them to kind of track when they've hit that line.
But then obviously I think the problem is like if there's no policy ideas that can like solve it, then I guess the other issue is that you just have to bring in more of like just more feedback going back and forth, or like maybe something said at the start that's just kind of like a guideline. Because if you're saying the problem is not people asking each other out, the problem is like people following people around and all that. But yeah, that's like I don't know.
The problem is
what,
like
something that can be said at the beginning. I don't know.
What Jacob said is these are soft social things, like giving people advice on how to relate to the other gender in this space is the equivalent of like going to a convention and saying, guys, you all just need to be more funny. Like I just don't think it gets people. Yeah, it just doesn't. I don't think it helps anything. I don't think it gets people anywhere. Yeah.
So this is a little off the cuff because I'm not experiencing this. If I were in your shoes and I were trying to do my best for this, I would approach this from the side of assuming something goes wrong and make it as easy for people to like reach out and say, hey, I'm uncomfortable. Have some kind of systems in place for that, and like good ways to de-escalate those situations, possibly while trying to avoid like demonizing people who step out of line. So
maybe here, wait. I want to separate out this conversation. Okay, so anything having to do with de-escalation or rape or like asking out, I think is boring. I don't think that's the interesting part because that behavior is really easy to fix. The problem is all of the soft flirting and the puppy dog stuff. That's the issue because I don't think you can make rules like going up to a guy like, hey, listen, dude, we were watching you and that woman is not making very much eye contact with you, but you've been trying to talk with her for 5 minutes, so you need to go away. Like, I don't think you can ever have that sort of policing system.
Absolutely. That's kind of why I'm saying like maybe like it'd be really weird, but maybe like talk to all the women and have like 2 or 3 like people you trust as sane for like them to reach out to if they feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, but like, what is a
those people
woman
can,
gonna?
like, step aside
But
and, like,
you have to
talk.
think about the path for the woman there, right? If I go to an event and I'm kind of feeling uncomfortable because of like 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 different interactions, I'm not reporting that. I'm just not going to go next time. Fuck that. It's not my job to clean up this event and report everybody. And like, that's just, I think they just feel weird.
Yeah, of course, and it's kind of like the like soft sexual harassment stuff too, where someone will like touch a lower back, and the woman's like really uncomfortable bringing it up because maybe it's innocent, maybe it's not, and she doesn't want to stir the waters.
A little bit, yeah. But again, I want to reject that
out
out hand, that comparison, because again, we're not talking about like overtly, because that's stuff that you can legislate against, or you can make rules against. That's stuff where it's like, this is obviously not good. Don't ever do this. And we can say don't do it. And if you do it, you're kicked out
So
and ejected.
what
But I think
if-
the
Sorry,
problem
when
is it's unreportable behavior, basically. Yeah.
What
When
if
I'm
the-
saying that, it's
oh,
not
sorry.
even about the specific behavior. It's more about the mindset of like, yeah, like it's something that's kind of like deniable in this gray zone, and women may not be comfortable engaging in something where it's like really hard to pin down.
I guess in my mind, I feel like the solution can't just be on the men either, right? Like when I look at solutions like this, that's community oriented, it has to be found within like men and women. So the question for me is there a way to make the women that are able to like manage being in this space and feel comfortable in this space for like whatever reason to be better at forming connections with one another? I think like the kind of like, what's the word to use for the way that some of the women feel the need to like compete in DGG? Unhealthy. I'll just use that word. There's often like this infighting amongst the girls specifically that seems to occur that is really, really strange and toxic to me. Because it's like, if you already feel a little bit otherized being like a woman or a femme person or a non-binary person, then imagine on top of that, the people that you would hope to most likely find camaraderie with are also attacking you in highly gendered ways. I feel like is a distinct problem. So when I think about this problem, I think what often happens is what's happening in this conversation. I'm not criticizing anyone, which becomes talking about what men need to do to baby women more. And I actually think that there's a part to that. I think that there are probably some small social things that guys can do, but the problem is probably a lot of the creepy guys aren't around for. They're in the DMs, they're like doing those sort of things. So men aren't necessarily noticing it. Which means we have to find ways for like women to feel empowered, to be comfortable enough to address that when they're by themselves. And then on top of that is women's culture amongst each other in and of itself. Because I know when I first came into DGG, it took me a really long time to find women to be friends with, which was really weird because I obviously have in my normal life lots of men that are friends with me and women, but it took me a really long time to find women that I'm friends with that I don't feel like there's any of this like weird competitiveness occurring. And like I could be deranged. Maybe LonerBox you can answer, or Jacob, do you guys feel similar as like men that you're like competing against other men specifically?
Literally not at all.
No.
So I think the reason why this happens is, so for the first point that you said, for who should the responsibility be on, since it's a heavily male-dominated environment, and since we're trying to bring more women in, then I think that like, I would say 95% of the responsibility rests on men here. If you want to ascribe more responsibility to women, real quick, I'll do post and then you can do it. If you want to ascribe more responsibility to women, they'll just leave. They're not going to come in. You can't bring in other people and have them work your community to make it open to other people coming in. That's just not ever going to happen realistically. On the first point, and then for the second point, for why women are the way they are, well, if you're coming into a space like this and it's already like overtly against your demographic, and then the people act in a certain way against your demographic, there's like two ways to get buy-in basically on that group. The first way is to already have highly masculine traits. So women that are like super high in disagreeability and are more masculine coded that way. So those are going to be the types of women you get. And then the second way is the pick me syndrome, to where the way you relate to the men is you emulate some of the behaviors that they have towards women so that you're more part of the group of men. So if you've got a bunch of men and they kind of treat women a certain way or whatever, well, you treat women the same way and you join them as a woman. And then that's kind of how you get your queen status, the pick me stuff. And I think that that's why even when you come into these communities and it's mostly men, but there are some women, even getting along with those women are difficult because those women aren't going to be coded the same as an ordinary woman in society. Mm-hmm. And they might even be more combative to you because now you're kind of like threatening their place or status. And all the other men are going to see it the same way.
So I agree with your framing there, but my question would be, do we have to so responsibility often coincides with like empowerment. Like oftentimes you get more responsibility when you're also given more capability. And so the question, I understand that if I just said to women to be like, it's, I like grace throat to them, and I'm like, it's your fault, and you need to just like tell them off and stuff. Most women are gonna be like, fuck you. That's not that easy. And I just would wholly agree with them. My question is there a way to make women feel like they have more capacity within the space specifically? They feel more comfortable valuing potentially like more feminine things, finding feminine things semi-respectable, and like challenging the way that we think about some of these things, so that women who have lots of feminine traits feel more respected for the fact that they have these feminine traits, and therefore feel more comfortable putting down their feet and like putting up lines because they feel like they have cultivated some level of respect, even if they're not highly masculine. Do you know what I'm saying?
So I may be way off. I don't feel like feminine traits are actually looked down on that much in this community, unless you're like crying at very light pushback.
I agree. I don't think they're looked down on, just to be clear. I don't think they're looked down on. I don't think they're always respected. So I'm putting like a neutral line in there, just to be clear.
I think a lot of this is almost being approached from like the issue of like, we have like people going into college who like don't even have basic literacy levels, and like we can't really solve it at that level. And it feels really bad to say nothing else, but I don't know if there's anything you can do there. I also, I think it's a lot easier to ask men to not engage in behaviors than for women to like completely uproot their social conditioning and like respond to behaviors in certain ways. That may be cope, but I feel like the like level of input and like the difficulty of that makes men a lot more responsible for how they're able to respond, because it's just a smaller ask.
Yeah, I think the ask of, because what we're looking for here at this point, you're not asking for women, you're asking for like professional community, like reorganizers at that point. Like you want women to come in, exhibit a totally different set of traits that they normally have, to basically socially re-engineer the group of people that you have. I think that ask, you'd have to be like hiring women to come in and participate in something like this. An ordinary woman isn't going to want to come in and do this type of work. I think these would be like exceptional people.
I have a couple of thoughts. Like, I think the first thing you mentioned a while ago, sorry, what was your name?
Jacob?
Jacob, sorry, yeah. The thing you said about, like, if a guy asks a girl out just in a normal way, like, I think you're cool, can I have your Instagram? And she says no. That's not a problem. But I imagine, at least the way I heard this particular thing described to me, maybe it's different, but I would imagine anyway, like, I think even if you're asked out politely and normally by one person, that's fine. But if because of the percentages, you're asked that like 10 times in a day, you're probably going to feel quite exhausted, right? So I think that still plays a part. I think it's still probably worth trying to like discourage the idea of people kind of just seeing the event as like their opportunity to meet a woman that they want to date. So I wouldn't write that off completely. The rest of it, I don't know. It just feels like, it feels so frustrating as someone who's like watching it from the outside, because some of the answers just seem so simple, even though it's hard to get like a policy around it. So one example being like the puppy dog thing of like following someone around, but really like if you've had like any experience, you kind of know that the right thing to do in that situation might be like, if you're not sure that you're just like following someone around, as well, just go somewhere else, and if she's actually interested, and then she'll come to you, right? Like that kind of thing. So
the issue is the people who engage in this behavior will never have the social awareness to do that. The people who engage in that behavior will shoot their shot and move on.
But I feel like you guys, I feel like a bit more of like a, okay, go on.
Go ahead.
If there's just like a more broad, because like, I don't know, I feel like it would just be so easy to, or it feels like it should be easy to just kind of communicate the idea that like you're here to canvas and like potentially make friends, right? Like, and I think just the more, and just to even just have like a reminder, like a casual reminder, like you're not here to like practice your dating skills or your pickup skills or whatever, or like to try and like use this event as an opportunity to meet someone, and just like, because I feel like just things are better when it's more in the back of the mind. But then again, I don't know if a general reminder like that is enough. It might be enough for some people, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like the only thing you can really do is kind of just say like, hey, this is a professional environment, and we just expect you guys not to be trying to flirt and meet people here. It kind of sucks, and expect the rule to get broken, but like putting that forward as like a general standard is probably the best way to avoid stuff. And like if it gets broken, you can like kind of take it on a case by case basis and maybe be a little loose with it, or just accept what happens is what happens.
Yeah, because I think when people do that kind of thing, it's probably because they're not like checking themselves, or like they just, I don't know. Whereas if it's something that can just exist in the back of the mind, like a little thought seed, I don't know.
I view it a lot like people talking about like if you can like talk to women or like try to meet women in the gym or in public, if it's absolutely okay. You can talk to whoever you want, whenever you want. But if you're a person asking that question, the answer is almost always going to be no, because you don't have the social awareness to even engage.
So I guess My concern, not even my concern, my thought, because it's not really a concern in and of itself. I think it's something that it feels like wants to be improved within the community to some extent. And I'm trying to brainstorm ideas to see an improvement, which is like women feeling more comfortable and more capable of being in the space. That's basically like my question. Is it possible? And I could be wrong. Do you guys feel like it's basically a ratio problem? There is no solution.
Well, I think the reason why I do these demographics first, because I think it's good to look at like what does the ordinary community look like in this type of space. And if it is, for instance, let's say it was the case that it's 90% men, 10% women across all of it, then you would expect that if you have like a perfect community, you would have, 10 women for every 90 men. And that would just be like, that would mean that you're doing a really good job. That means you're not pushing anybody out. The demographics are representative in your events as in the ordinary community, but that might already look like a failure, right? Because you're like, oh shit, we've got 9 guys for every one woman.
Yeah, I think viewing it from like a quota lens is going to be really bad, right? Like,
well, no, I think you have to, because for instance, if you hold events, let's say for instance, like here's hypothetically, let's say that in this space, let's say that there was 1 woman for every 1,000 men. If that was the case, then our event was exemplary. We had an amazing turnout of women, right? Because we had like 5 or 10 women or whatever. That was insane. But let's say that it's actually 50-50. And then you look at the events like, holy shit, there's a huge problem here, right? This is why I don't know what these like baseline numbers are for like the political debate space, but getting these baseline numbers are kind of important because it lets you adjust your expectations to figure out if you're doing good, bad, or about what you should be. And it's hard to find
it's
other
a difficult
things
thing
to compare to
right now because I feel like these events, like it's progressive victory, but it's really just like debate live streamer. That's like the dominant audience, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you go like Labour Party canvassing or Democrat Party canvassing, then it's going to be much more broad. So even just like getting a few fucking like soy video essayists and their audiences would probably change things as well. But who knows?
I agree.
I just don't. I don't like the whole like. I feel like every suggestion that's being floated, there's like a fucking barrage of people in your Kick chat being like, "No, never gonna happen." No, like that's just that kind of resignation just annoys me because it feels like a lot of these things are kind of like easy on a one-to-one level, but yeah, just so there's definitely something that can be done. I think.
Yeah, I guess like when I look at your baseline, I agree. Saying that it's 90% men and 10% women isn't inherently a failure. It might actually be completely representative of the space. The question is the space that we're representing, is it organically what we think it should be? Or is there, for example, if there is a like cultural masculinization that is more common. So if you have more masculine traits, you'll be respected more in the community. If you have masculine traits, people will listen to you more. You'll probably have more fun. You'll be enjoyed more. Whereas if you have more traditionally feminine traits, people might tell you that you're cringe for doing like feminine things. They might tell you that you're like weak, or they might just not respect you. It might not even be negative. They just might not confer you any respect and be more willing to kind of like blow over your opinion when you're speaking. That to me, if that like kind of like milieu is occurring, it wouldn't be surprising to me that the community this is occurring in would say, well, we don't hate women. And I would be like, I agree. I don't think you do. But also for women to be like, and femme people to be like, I don't know if I feel fully comfortable, or I don't know if I feel fully welcomed. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. I agree about the baseline because I'm not really concerned about the quota. What I'm concerned about is, do people who inhabit more feminine traits feel like, if nothing else, that there is something valuable that they contribute, or is almost all feminine traits viewed as cringe? Because I would say societally, feminine traits are viewed as like nice or cringe or weak.
Yeah, so I may have a heterodox take on this. I don't think feminine traits are often viewed as cringe. I think if you just get called out on them and you just say, yeah, like I'm human, I like this thing, no one's ever going to keep following that down. Like if you're like being vulnerable and someone's like being shitty about it and like trying to weaponize it against you, and you just say like, yeah, I don't know, this is how I feel. If you want to like go in on that, like that's going to be like Giga Chad. Okay. No one's ever going to continue diving in on that.
Okay, so maybe I'll give an example. One of the feminine traits that I think is most strongly pronounced in Stephen's platform, that I don't think people identify, that I would say is broadly associated with femininity, is the fact that he can be able to bridge and understand people from all sorts of places. He's kind of like this social glue. He's able to code switch, and people might be like, that's not feminine. It seems to be that our society tends to associate being understanding and compassionate and hearing the other side with feminine things. So I'm not saying it's inherently feminine.
That might be like a feminine, like intellectual trait.
Yes,
maybe.
it
But
is.
in terms of like the demeanor of my stream, I would say that it's heavily masculine in its encoding. So like I can be empathetic and understanding all of that, and we might consider that on the maybe that would be further down the agreeable spectrum in terms of agreeableness. But when you actually come to my stream, we're screaming at people, calling them fucking retards, bringing them on, insulting them, saying they're down, blah blah blah, like shouting at people, like that's a very like masculine coded way of interacting, and I don't think people.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. So just to be clear, when I'm saying that this is like a feminine trait, I'm not saying that you are. I would say broadly your space is deeply masculine. But when I look at this trait, which is like being understanding, some of the people that I think are best at that is somebody like Pixie. Pixie is really good. She is friends with like rad femmes all the way to like Trump loving people. Like she's able to basically meet people where they are and kind of value them as individuals and kind of like code switch, right? Which is actually a really commendable trait. It's really
sure,
good. And it's
like,
good that you do it.
Yeah, but like what is Pixie the most known for in my community? Do you know? I don't know how long you've been watching my series. She's known for her masculine performances, which was the destruction of mind waves. That will, I don't know if she'll ever get more recognition for anything than the mind waves debate. That was like the most positive thing that she got in my community, and that was like a disagreeable conversation where she, yeah.
Yeah, because no, that's to my point. It's because what is valued and like lauded and celebrated and complimented in the community and reinforced is more masculine things, which is fine, by the way. I don't think that that's bad. My question is, why doesn't this community value that feminine trait that you embody, and that a lot of them actually, in fact, it's fundamental to the podcast that we're starting, and it's the one thing that makes DGG so unique, which is that there are conservatives, there are people from all across, and they are willing to engage, usually in good faith, and talk to each other, which is awesome. It's just respectable. But
because I think across political
that.
ideologies, there's going to be a lot of shared similarity in terms of how conservatives act and how progressives act, like on a very, very, very fundamental level. But it might be between men and women. Fundamentally, there are huge disagreements in terms of what level of like agreeability you want to see, in terms of how somebody communicates and what their demeanor is. And watching people do like internet blood sports and scream at each other, just by and large, is just never going to be very appealing to a woman. It's just not that much. It's not that entertaining to watch. For like where socially where women are at right now.
I agree. I feel like I'm not getting away from these like quotas. I don't really care if women want to watch necessarily. My question is, I guess I'll shift it more. My question is now, why are the feminine traits that are already embodied within this space not celebrated and respected as much as when the masculine traits are embodied within this space?
Because I think the thing that is the most attractive to this space, where it excels in the most, is in the combative masculine traits.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a way to see a appreciation for feminine traits?
Possibly, but that's not what I excel in, so that's never going to be, or at least that's not what I'm like really good in. So that's not going to be what people are going to tune into me for, probably.
Erudite, when you're talking about feminine traits, what do you think the gain would be? What's the measurable difference if the community was more accepting of feminine traits? What would the benefit to women in the community be? I'm not a woman, so I may not understand, but like I don't actually think that most of the issues that I see in DGG are from not like being accepting of feminine traits.
I guess I'm postulating a hypothesis. I suspect that if feminine traits were potentially viewed as more respect-worthy and more often, even just like in casual ways of like, I mean, like, awesome, that's great. Like if you go to, I don't want to say her name without upsetting people, but if you go to Brittany Simon's streams, well, there's lots of issues that you might have with it. It is a very feminine community, right? And if you look at the way that the chat comments, it's obviously going to be very different. I'm curious to know, I have a hypothesis that if we saw feminine traits being respected more, that we would see retention of women potentially increase, because they would feel like traits that they probably are more naturally inclined toward is valued in itself.
I don't know if that's valuing feminine traits, though, so much as people gathering around somebody that embodies feminine traits. Like, I think it follows from the creator. So, like, if I were to start acting way more effeminately coded, then I think that over time the community would start to prefer those traits more. like in some ways it's already happened. So from 2016 to 2018, I was probably way further down the disagreeable spectrum, in terms of like, it was internet blood sports, screaming at people, calling people retarded, et cetera, et cetera. And then as we kind of started like the understanding empathy arc, like the disagreeableness decreased. Now it's still like a highly combative area, and that's still what people like watch for, but not as much as it used to be. And then the community expectation will lag a little bit behind whatever the demeanor of the creator is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Okay, that was annoying the fuck out of me. Are you hearing me say you should be nice?
Nope, I'm listening
Good.
and engaging with it. Yeah.
Okay. I just see a lot of people being like, come on, Steven, just be nice, which is not at all what I'm saying. It's a hypothesis about basically, I don't think our society does respect feminine traits as much as I would like to see. I think a lot of times when we look at somebody who's understanding, we'll say something like, she's really nice, which is awesome, but we wouldn't say something like, that's really respect worthy, and I respect that she's able to like meet people across like so many different lines and like try to understand them anyways. I don't see that embodied nearly as much in at least the social spaces that I occupy.
I might be coping here, but like when I hear understanding coded with gendered language, I view it very differently. I think understanding is a valuable trait that's valued in everyone. I think it's really, really good. I think though, generally when I hear it used to describe women, it's often like not actually being understanding. It's often not standing up.
Oh, you. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I was going to agree with that 1 billion%. I think that there's a lot of weird things that happens when people talk about feminine traits and what feminine traits are valued and not valued. And it's hard to separate out, like, there's like 3 levels. There's when you say feminine, what do you mean by feminine is the first question. And then when other people act feminine, and then we talk about the traits themselves, like, oh, well, they're understanding. What do we mean by other people valuing that? Or what do we mean by those traits? And then the third thing is, what do we actually mean when people are being like understanding? So there was a really interesting thing that popped up last night where Lav tried to come onto a stream where Kelly was having a disagreement with, I don't remember who.
Lav, the most understanding.
With Irrelevant, I think, over like her behavior. And Lav came in and tried to 5-factor analysis Kelly, and Lav was incredibly adamant that Kelly was a very agreeable person over the last conversation that she just had with Irrelevant. And the entire conversation was her arguing with Irrelevant over whether or not she was culpable for some behavior or not, and then her giving rationalization, or not, her giving reasons why, well, no, I did this because of this, or I do this because of that. And Lav's interpretation was like, oh, look, she's being super agreeable because she's explaining her behavior. Whereas I'm pretty sure anybody that knows what they're talking about and looking at 5-factor is like, well, no, when you rationalize or justify behavior, that is by definition a disagreeable trait, right? When somebody says, hey, you hurt my feelings, you're like, okay, well, I just did it because of this, that's a disagreeable thing, right? A more agreeable thing is like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I don't know, my bad, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
right? That's like more agreeable, acquiescing, quiet, submissive, or whatever, as opposed to justifying, fighting, arguing, not taking accountability, et cetera, et cetera.
Disagreeing,
yeah.
makes you disagreeable.
I agree with what Jacob said. I would be interested in analyzing the way that some people view certain traits. I think sometimes that guys will say, or people will say things like feminine traits aren't valued, and then they'll give something like understanding, and then in people's minds they'll say, well, people don't value the trait of understanding. But when a man especially does understanding really well, or even when a woman does understand, but she's like, listen, I see where you're coming from, I get it, here's boom, 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 they actually do value that trait. But that a like toxically feminine encoding of understanding is actually, I'm just going to sit here and validate every single toxic behavior you have, I'm not going to have a spine, I'm not going to call you out on anything, and I'm just going to sit here and yas queen you. And then someone would be like, oh, well, look, I was like validating and empathetic. It's like, no, you were toxic and enabling, and now you just think that men are being sexist when you're just exhibiting bad behavior.
Sure,
So,
I
yeah.
agree. I think in part of why we have a bad language of this is that people get like hyper pedantic once we get into feminine masculine, whereas like whenever you talk about it, you have to necessarily be talking about like basically somewhat ambiguated societal zeitgeists, right? Like that's fundamentally what they are, and they're always going to change. And if you get into niche groups, what is feminine and masculine obviously changes. So I agree that it's tricky because it's ambiguous in nature. I guess what you're outlining here to me isn't an issue with saying that understanding is respect worthy. It's saying understanding is good and enabling is bad. And I don't think our society has done a good enough job actually disentangling whatever we want to call femininity in our own society to even be able to put our finger on what does our society often view as feminine traits? What do they look like? What are toxic forms of it? What are healthy forms of it? So I would like agree with all of that. I guess at the same time, I'm saying I want to see if we can try to figure it out a little bit.
Maybe,
so
yeah.
Like when you
Good.
get into spaces that are not like right wing or red pill, I feel like people kind of cringe at the idea of even calling things like masculine or feminine anyway, but they kind of substitute it, right? Like, I feel like when people in a left or leaning space want to call something too feminine, they'll just say like soy, or for like masculine, I guess they'll say like giga chat stuff.
Yeah.
And I sometimes feel like
Although you're illustrating
like,
just the problem right there with what you're saying, where masculine traits being like coded as cool and feminine traits being coded as soy and lame, right? Yeah. I'm not saying that's your fault or it's about anything, but I'm saying like, yeah, that's how people tend to view it. Yeah. But I think when you break apart the actual traits, I feel very strongly about this. And I know red pill people have hijacked these conversations because their vocabulary is woefully inept to describe any human interaction. But I think that men exhibiting feminine traits is almost always seen as a really good thing. Like, even if you think of the most feminine traits of like, like elegance, nobody looks at a male gymnast and is like, ooh, what a feminine, like, like there's so much precision in his movement. Like nobody thinks that. Or like caretaker, right? At the very least for women, and generally for men, nobody looks like a dad going to the park with his son and it's like, ooh, that's like a woman's job. Why is he pushing his son on the swing? Or why is he changing his son's diaper? Ooh, what a caretaker trait. That's for women. So I think that when people are exhibiting positive values of these traits, I think people generally have good perceptions of it. There might be like exceptions on the fringe, like women in leadership roles.
Do people label it as feminine?
No, that's why I don't like the words like feminine or masculine, because I think that those words have just gotten like grouped in, like webbed together with so many other types of connotations that it's just hard to understand. Like when people think feminine, they think women, and when they think masculine, they think male. And rather than like, here's a collection of traits on each side that tend to correlate with each side, they don't think of the traits, they think of like certain behaviors.
Women and men, doing certain things. Mm-hmm. So I guess, is there a language that we could utilize that could capture this? That like when people are doing caretaking behaviors, and we often associate that with femininity, is there a better word than femininity to call it? Because the issue is like, I want to be a gender abolitionist. I just don't know if people will actually ever work that way. It seems like we like categories. We like to organize these things into categories. I don't see feminine and masculine as categories, even if we rename them, going away.
Why do you even need to put them in a box? Like, I feel like almost all these behaviors can like exist really, really well for both men and women, like understanding and stuff. I'm like generally like probably pretty privileged in this, and that I'm fairly masculine looking and like just in behavior. But every time I do like what would be considered a feminine trait, it's like generally really well received as long as you own it. Mm-hmm. The issue is if you do something feminine and then you kind of like have this weird like self-shaming response where you're like admitting and like attacking yourself for it, it's bad. Like being vulnerable or like having issues or admitting you're in pain. I had some weird relationship stuff that had me sad like a week ago, and I like reached out to a friend and I like kind of like said some bitch shit in there. Like was really just kind of sad posting and like just trauma dumping to another dude. Trauma dumping is not the right word, but like just sad posting to a dude, and like it's kind of uncomfortable. But like if you just say like, yeah, like I don't know, this sucks, I'm human, this isn't great. Like no one's ever really gonna judge you about that because everyone's had these feelings, and if you just own it fully, like no one's really gonna care. And it's I don't really like gendering things. I also think that sometimes a lot of the hate that women get for being masculine comes from people using the almost like red pill stoic men are aggressive apes version of masculine, where like women will be aggro, but they'll kind of be aggro in a way that is different than when men are like assertive or like disagreeable. Mm-hmm. This isn't always true. Sometimes women will catch more hate, but like Kelly will get more hate because she's actually I don't want to talk about Kelly. People will get more hate because they'll like be disagreeable as a woman, which is awesome, but they'll often do it in ways that are like slightly different than men. I think because they are a little more defensive about it and like expect that people don't expect them to do it, so they won't own the take, almost in the same way that like if guys are doing something feminine or vulnerable and they like back off or they shame themselves for it, people aren't going to respond onto it as well. I think women kind of do the same thing when they inhabit masculine traits. But if they do it in a way where they're like owning it more and just kind of treating it as if a man would, in a healthy way of using that trait, it's probably fine.
Yeah, I would agree that that's broadly where. And so I think, do you mind if I back up to where you started at, where you said like, why do we have to?
Yeah, I kind of rambled there.
No, you didn't ramble at all. It was interesting. I just want to like address a couple of things. I think that's a really good question because I would say like probably 6 years ago I was a lot more like leaning towards like staunch gender abolitionism. And it seems like we just can't get away from categorizing. Is the main reason why I think that we like have to have these labels. I don't think we have to. There's no like impetus within me that says I insist on having these. It just seems that the way our brains work in large part with schemas and like patternicity and stuff, that we're always going to tend towards wanting to categorize things to some degree and attach labels to them, especially when we see things emerging in patterns over and over again. We'll create like an archetype label for that thing, right? Like the pick me girl is an example of like a category group of people. I just don't really see these things going away. And so in my mind, I basically shifted being like, okay, well, I don't know if like people talking about masculine and feminine is ever really going to go away because like because of the fact that there is a sexual dimorphism going on. So my question is there a way to to move society in a direction where when we talk about the masculine and feminine, they are more helpful to more people, and they're like useful categories, I guess?
I mean, I think for me, it's just about like saying like, okay, man, it's okay to admit you have feelings. You can be hurt. You can like say your like desires in a way that like may have someone able to weaponize them against you in a way that's okay. And like tell women like, yeah, you can tell people to f off. You can like stand up for yourself, and that's cool too. And like the more we enable the gendering of the language, like the less likely that is to happen.
Oh, so you think that the gendering of the language itself actually will detract away from like men being able to be quote unquote feminine?
Because like men don't want to be feminine, women don't want to be masculine. Like it's just kind of like coded into like who we want to be.
Wow, like gamers, thanks for 10 go to subs. Yeah, I agree. That's like, kind of going back to what I said before. Like when you say feminine and masculine, that invokes like 3 different things, right? It can invoke on a purely academic level that nobody thinks of it, by the way. It invokes like 5-factor stuff like, oh, men are, lower in agreeableness or tend to be, somebody might be this or that for conscientiousness or whatever. But like nobody actually thinks of it that way. When they think of masculine and feminine, the first thing they think about is appearance, right? That's like the first thing that and that's like it's the hollowest interpretation, but it's probably the one that a lot of people talk about, right? So for instance, for red pillars, whether you're masculine or feminine is almost immediately going to come down to how you look physically. That's it. Even though that has little to nothing to do with like masculine or feminine actual personality traits, they'll just go by appearance. And then the second thing is going to be, I think, communication styles, like the way that a trait is communicated. So for instance, like what you said earlier about quote unquote understanding, somebody might think somebody's understanding, but because of the way they communicate, it's not actually understanding. They're just like enabling or being validating, Mm-hmm. So by the time you dig all the way into like, the actual feminine or masculine traits, you might say like, oh, you need more feminine traits. And the first 2 places, most people are going to think like, what, you want to put on a fucking dress? And then past that, they might think like, oh, what, you want me to be like catty, like a mean girl? And then very few of them are gonna be like, oh, maybe I should work on, like these aspects of my personality. That's just like that type of academic understanding or biological or sociobiological or psychological understanding of masculine and feminine traits is, I think, really far removed from the average person's engagement with the words masculine and feminine.
Okay. So then I guess, how would you recommend I talk about it going forward? Because I still think that because like the language conversation is interesting, which we're having, but there's also this thing that I'm trying to think about and wrestle about, which is there a way that femme people in a space that is more male dominant can be made to enjoy themselves more and linger more through like bottom up? I
don't think so.
You don't think so at all?
If there are going to be, I think that because if we break this down like incredibly coldly and just like by the factors, what you're kind of asking is like, is there a space that selects for like people who are ultra high in disagreeability? Can we make it so that people that are ultra high in agreeability enjoy that space? I don't know if you can do that without fundamentally changing the space. Like if you took people that were ultra low in openness, and you were like, how do we get these people to enjoy like hiking mushroom retreats? I don't know if that ever happens. It's just not. That's like a mismatch on personality trait to hobby, which is why I started with this, where I'm like, this space naturally might just draw people of this temperament, and then women and men tend to skew along these lines for temperament. I don't know if you make a space that attracts people with this temperament appeal to people of wildly different temperaments.
I agree.
So is the question more just like, we're not trying to like massively change the ratio in the communities. It's just more, we have this ratio, but how do we make sure the 5 or the 7 or the 10% actually feel
that's where I was going to go.
Like one of the, I
don't want to make
I feel like
more agreeable people like a disagreeable space. That's not going to happen. And that's like why the space is, like, I don't want to change the fundamentals of the space.
Yeah, but I feel like you have to if you want to attract those people.
How do you make disagreeable women feel like they can continue to stay? Because how many disagreeable women who are already naturally drawn to the space leave the space due to other things? And is it more targeted at women? Sorry, Loner. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was saying that's kind of what happens, at least in my area is like if a woman leaves or complains, it's almost always because of some like the comments people make when a fucking hot girl shows up on the stream and like and you forget to ban one or two of them, that kind of thing. Or I guess maybe a more general, like I guess women just feeling like they don't get taken as seriously, which is difficult because it can just be because she's like saying dumb shit, but it can also very feasibly be because like that men just get away with things that women don't, I guess.
Well, I feel like there's like positive sexism and negative sexism, right? And there's an issue in that I don't think women are socialized to be debate bros nearly as much as men are. I don't think that's because women are less capable. I just think they often grow up doing it less often, which is why in part women aren't going to be taken as seriously because sometimes there's genuine skill issues, right? So like sometimes like when people are being like, erudite, you're a dumb fuck. I'm being like, am I actually a dumb fuck? Like I think it's really important like for women and stuff to not immediately go, they're just saying that because I'm a woman. But is there sometimes truth if people are saying you are this because of like the gendered thing? Is there a way to decrease it? Is there a way to value certain gendered things that don't take away from the combativeness, but to go, this is a good thing, even though it's more representative in women?
I just don't know how do you change what a space values without changing the space? That's my question, I guess. Like what's an example of that happening? Like for like a concrete example of that happening? Because it sounds like to analogize, it sounds like there's a forest with trees and all of the branches are exactly 6 feet tall. And there's a bunch of people that like to run into the forest and jump on the trees. And like, that's the trait that we're selecting for is people that tend to be tall enough to grab the branches and climb up. And we're trying to say, well, we've got a whole bunch of people that are a lot shorter, maybe 5'3", 5'4" on average, that also want to go into the forest and jump on the trees. How do we make this space more friendly to them without changing the trees? It feels like that's the question. I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't know. Yeah. So I'm curious if there's like an example of like, because the space is conditioned for a certain temperament. That temperament seems to heavily lean in a certain gendered bias. The women that join that space are going to be for the forest. It'll just be really tall women that aren't going to be like the other women. So when the shorter women come in and they look to the tall women, the 6 foot tall woman is going to probably synergize better with a 5'10" man than the 5'3" woman. Like, how do you make the space more amenable if it's a heavily disagreeable space that's built around debate and openness to new ideas or whatever the fuck else, all these temperaments? How do you make that more in line? Yeah. How do you get somebody that doesn't have that temperament to enjoy that space with that temperament?
Okay. Do you think that our space is high? So first of all, I don't know if the tree example works well because there is like this like essentialist element that gets attached to it, right?
Yep. It doesn't have to be essentialist
element?
I'm just saying that it doesn't matter if it's essentialist or not. Just like it doesn't matter if you're born gay or you become gay when you're 4 years old. I'm just saying that at the point to where people are coming onto the internet, all the big socialization has already happened. So then the question is do women tend to skew in one direction in terms of how they're socialized versus men?
Definitely.
That seems to be the case. And it seems that this particular space selects for a temperament and has the demeanor of people with temperaments that are like heavily disagreeable. And women in general don't seem to be drawn to those spaces. So how do you get a woman to want to be in that space if women's social temperaments are starting off not even close to that?
So I guess I'll go back. I don't really care about changing the space so that women want to come into it more.
What are we talking about then?
The attrition rate. I want to make sure that those who are already naturally drawn toward it don't get chased off by things unrelated to the space. So when you have the 6 foot tall women coming in to climb trees, sure. I don't want them getting chased off because like maybe 6 foot tall women don't have as much upper body strength. So they use like, for the sake of this analogy, they use a lot more like leg techniques. And a bunch of people are like, that's kind of cringe. Pull-ups and like muscle-ups are so much cooler to do on trees. And it's like, well, both are fine. Both are fucking fine.
Sure.
They're just different. So my question is that occurring? And is the existence of that occurring causing an attrition of women in the space? And if it is there anything where we can be like, hey guys, using your legs to climb trees is just as neutral as using pull-ups?
Maybe, yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
I don't know if, I don't know what that attrition rate is. I'm not sure actually.
Me neither. I don't either. This is why I'm saying this is all like hypothetical because what we're talking about here is unknowable social engineering with no data.
Yeah.
Which is why
I've got a really good solution.
Okay, I want to hear it.
Let's give every woman in DGG their own flair, and they have to report their phone numbers. And if they don't chat for at least a month, they have to do an exit survey for why they left.
That's true.
So does that
the
not
data
happen to
part of me is like,
anyone
that's
else here?
actually such a good idea, but I know it's a fucking terrible idea.
Could you imagine?
I mean, does that not happen to anyone else here? Is there not like people leave the community and they tell you why? Or
Yeah, it happens, but I mean, like, it happens a lot
Definitely.
for women and for men.
And
so.
it's a selection bias of who's going to come forward and tell you why they're leaving, right? So like right now, as I'm having this conversation, I've probably had like 7 to 8 women message me being like, I totally understand what you're talking about. Thank you. But I'm also getting a selection bias. There's probably like, I think I've seen like Sophia in the chat being like, you, Erudite, you're stupid and wrong. And so it's like, it's really hard to even pull this data because it's really hard to not get selection bias on specifically like social engineering type questions. So if you're a woman and you hate what I'm saying, please reach out and let me know so I can think about what you're saying too.
It's just like, because you don't have to like save the world, right? It seems to be that like that there's an ongoing conversation, right? Because I'd imagine probably compared to 10 years ago, you, Destiny, probably have had different things that used to be acceptable coming from the chat or the Reddit that with regards to women, they're not acceptable anymore, right? I know that's happened with me as well, right? So it seems to be that this whole thing started because, was it a couple of women at PV said that they were fucking asked out a whole bunch of times and felt uncomfortable. So is that particular issue just something that we can do anything about? Or is that just like a fact of the 95% versus 5 and get fucked?
I mean, you could regulate behaviors like that. I just don't think that's the interesting question. You can like very easily say, don't ask anybody out, do that after events, but.
Or make like girl groups for them to like meet each other, although I guess that gets complicated with.
I'm assuming this is probably just internet socialization issues, but I feel like there's a lot of spaces that are very male that don't have these same type of problems. Like if you go to a BJJ gym, there's like generally people who are like socializing and like physically touching each other all the time, and it's very male dominant, but you don't seem to have the same insane issues that like online spaces have. I think that's just
heavily super
spaces.
ultra disagree. I've heard from at least like 3 or 4 different women that the BJJ spaces have a lot of insane. In fact, the closest example I can think of is actually army stuff. That there's just like, there'll be a few women in the gym. You'll have like your queen bee woman that like is either looking out for or competing with other women. You'll have, like women that will go, there's just like a whole bunch of weird dynamics with it. Women don't like rolling with guys who are lower belts because they're too rough. And then so women gravitate towards like higher belts, and then there's like favoritism, or that there are women that I've heard that that's like a nightmare. I could be wrong, but just from everything
Could very easily be right. I might have been lucky with the one gym I went to.
Okay.
But I guess you would maybe expect a space like a political one to be a little bit better than like BJJ gyms or like chess clubs or anything like that, because those communities aren't geared around social issues and talking. It's not like people necessarily have a special interest in social issues.
Sure, but remember, this space isn't about the issues. It's about the demeanor. That's the important thing, I think. The demeanor of the space is hyper masculine. The issues can be social issues or things that we care about, but even like a female issue like abortion, the way that's tackled in this community is going to be insanely aggressive. It's going to be very masculine, right?
Right. So I guess I actually think that the tree height thing is a really good analogy to work off of, because essentially the question I'm posing, I'm not sure if you agree, Loner. So my question is, if women have to use if the tall women have to use a slightly different climbing technique because of like testosterone and all that good stuff, does the space look at the different technique that she has to utilize as neutral? Which I suspect for the most part. Some people are going to be like, actually, like sexist me, like it's worse to climb with your legs. But the biggest issue is most people think that climbing with your upper body only is the most based thing. When it's like, well, it's just like a different thing. That's my question. Is that happening? And is there a way to shift that within the culture itself of saying like, climbing with your legs is also impressive. It's cool to see this like slightly more different style of engaging in combative debate is also good. Do you know what I'm saying?
What's the real world? Like, I need like, what's a real world example for this, like in this community or like in this like kind of area? Like, what would that look like? Like an actual example?
Yeah, this is where I think the analogy doesn't break down, but I would need to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like that doesn't map onto like my understanding of what the issues in this space are. I feel like there's almost like not systemic racism issues, but like systemic issues when you just have spaces like this. I think I'm generally like not too insane of a dude, but like even I will like notice myself replying to women more than men because they're like a novel experience and like a novel like generally set of ideas in like a chat room, right? They're like able to like bring a different perspective, so you're more likely to engage with them. And if everyone feels like that, even if no one's acting like weirdly, that's going to create a really weird environment where you have like a huge mismatch of messages and like levels of attention and like just weird shit going on with no individual actor doing anything that's actually wrong.
Yeah.
I think that was the big thing that I started this convo off. I don't know if you're listening, but there were like a lot of behaviors going on in my Discord that would kind of make women feel a little bit weird or uncomfortable, but nobody individual was actually doing anything that wrong. Like it might be a guy saying like, oh, hey, yeah, we're chatting a lot, like, oh, cool, do you want to trade DMs or blah, blah, blah. And there's like nothing really wrong going on. But if every single guy is like this, it's like, okay, well.
What if,
I don't really think I have, sorry, go ahead.
No worries, sorry.
I was going to say I don't really have anything to add, so I'm going to go back to work.
Love you.
Thanks for stopping
Good chat,
by.
guys.
Hi,
Loser.
Bye. Okay. What if we went back to the understanding piece? Because I actually think it's decently feminine in how you engage in it, and it doesn't, well, I was going to say it doesn't fall into enabling, but that's not true. You're super enabling.
Well, not in my conversations. That's you're mixing a lot of things up. In my conversations with other people, in terms of like the political content that I do, I think that even in my understanding thing, that's usually like a 1-2 punch, or it's backed up by like heavy disagreeableness as well.
But you're also really understanding an interpersonal. I don't know if I agree that they're really distinct. Like I think the capacity that you bring to conversations to understand them. Well, I agree that the milieu that it's occurring within is totally different. It's a debate versus like with your friends. I would say even in an interpersonal level, you are high charitability, probably problematically charitability. You're overly understanding. You give high levels of benefit of the doubt, both to your contender in a debate and a friend in your life, correct?
Yeah, but I feel like we're talking about like an intellectual process right now rather than, we're talking about an intellectual process right now rather than like the demeanor, I think. So like the separation might be, if somebody comes in, let's say somebody comes in and let's say that LonerBox wants to criticize my behavior, and he's saying things like, "Hey, I think that you're being too harsh on the Israelis." Okay, actually, you know, like my Christian grandparents I supported in Lebanon, I actually support the Israelis spreading settlements into the West Bank. There are like, even when we talk about agreeableness and disagreeableness, like I could intellectually disagree, but it could be really agreeable. So for instance, he might come in and say that, he'd be like, okay, you're really wrong. Somebody be like, yeah, maybe. I mean, like, I don't think you're right. I don't know. I don't think you're right on that. I don't agree. I can't defend it right now, but I don't really agree. That would be like, am I being disagreeable there? I wouldn't say so. I'd say the demeanor is actually highly agreeable. The person might be disagreeing as an action, like intellectually, but the demeanor is incredibly agreeable. Or he might come in and he might say something along the lines of like, yeah, like I think that you are supporting the West Bank expansions, the settlements. I think that's bad. You shouldn't be supporting it. And I might be like, what he says that you're supporting this, and I don't think that you should support this. And so I disagreed, but I was agreeable. So I could say I could agree and be disagreeable, where he's like, you shouldn't support this. Like, yeah, I probably shouldn't. I can't find another way to do this. Okay, yeah, you're right, but I don't know what else the solution is. Okay, maybe this is the only way to do it, right? So I'm like agreeing with him, but I'm being very disagreeable. I think it's really important to say. It seems like a minutia, but I think that separating out the demeanor is what's the attractive quality, not the actual like just the thoughts or the words.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, like the aesthetic of like agreeability or disagreeability is always going to come on top, right? So like no one's ever going to say like, oh, watch this debate because Destiny was very empathetic towards this person and kind of navigated them to a different understanding through like a Socratic like mutual understanding. No, it's always like destroy this person, even though you might be doing it from like an empathetic position.
Sure.
Or,
although there are empathetic debates where I am genuinely just like trying to be understanding and everything. Yeah, that was I would say even at that, while I was more agreeable there in terms of agreeing, I would still say that my demeanor there was kind of was more on the disagreeable side if it was a spectrum, because there were a lot of points where we had heavy disagreement, like for instance over the Donald Trump stuff. Yep. Even on the stuff where we were agreeable, I think that generally, I think that my demeanor is still a bit on the disagreeable side. Not as much as going to be disagreeable. Yeah,
I think I want to get away from the words agreeable and disagreeable, because even in 5-factor, these things break down, right? So I'm pretty low in agreeableness, but I'm actually high compassion. So my agreeable trait is at like 50 or something like that. But that's because my compassion is at like 70, but my politeness, for example, is at like 20. So there's ways that you would like break this down. So when we're saying like agreeable, I feel like maybe we need to get even more like fine tooth in how we're describing these things. So what I'm looking for is there a time in an interpersonal situation where you feel like you gave a lot of benefit of the doubt and tried to understand the person you were in? You don't have to go into like specifics, obviously, but is there like an example you can think of?
Like on stream?
Yeah. Sure, let's stay to public stuff. I just want I want to get to like specific examples to see if we can like tease out what's going on.
So are you looking for a thing where I'm like trying to be the most empathetic towards a person, or?
Yes, most empathetic, and genuinely you disagree with them and you're trying to understand their perspective. And like speak to them in their language.
Rob, no, I don't think so. Maybe the Mark Lamont guy? Mark Lamont Hill, the professor dude?
Oh, I don't think I watched that one. Fuck.
What else?
Okay.
You and Brittany did this? Yeah, but we didn't have generally huge points of disagreement, I don't think.
Until we did.
Yeah, but there was no conversation about that.
What wasn't there one?
Where we disagreed a ton?
Yeah, the one where like I came in and I said the same things you said.
Maybe.
Not gonna lie, I don't really know exactly where this conversation's going. What was if you could like summarize what you're trying to figure out in like one question, what would you say right now?
I don't know. Initially, I thought it was relating to quota stuff. Like, how do you bring more women into the space? But it seems like her question is more along the lines of like, how do you get people in this space to appreciate traits that aren't too different, to appreciate traits that women exhibit that aren't necessarily the same types of traits that men have in this space, but aren't traits that are relevant to why people like this space. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
I feel like it's such a fine-tuned question. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Indication that that's like a problem though?
Well, that's why I asked about like the attrition rate, because like I know there might be a high attrition rate for women, but there's probably a high attrition rate for men too, and I don't know if it's like disproportionate. I'm not sure. I don't really know.
Yeah, I swear the only time I ever hear about women like leaving the space, it's because of either being creeped on or because of some misogyny shit. Like that's usually what I hear. But
Did you pick one?
What?
Yeah, I don't
Did you
know.
pick one?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. But you can make like a sample debate or a sample conversation or.
Do you find percentages going up because do you check your analytics for like gender stuff often on YouTube?
Me? Yeah, I think it's like 7% women.
7%. I think I'm on 8. Holy shit.
Fuck yeah.
But yeah, do you notice like the number going up and down depending on what arcs you're on?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't checked. I'm sure on the red pill arc it was probably higher for women because that was like dating related stuff is more interesting in general, versus like the more heavily political stuff is going to be more men probably, depending on the political stuff. I bet if I did like an abortion arc, that might draw a little bit more on the woman's side versus the man's side.
What's your percentage, LonerBox? Actually, I'm curious. What's your demographic?
On my live channel, I thought it was 8. It's actually down to 7 now. Whoops. Must have been the lolly shit.
And
then
what?
I think it was 8, but now it's down to 7.
And Steven, sorry, yours is
7
I
as
think
well.
7, yeah.
7 as well. Okay, mine is significantly higher, which makes sense because I'm a woman.
But my video essays used to be like, they would go up to 20 sometimes, and maybe as low as 10, 11, 12, hovering on 15.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's because it's like you said, you're still being disagreeable and still being combative, but just in a more feminine, like snarky way. So I don't know. But I think the question of retention is probably an easier one to address than getting more women into the space, like
Okay.
changing percentages.
What's good about Jo, the silly serious? What are some of her strengths?
She does all the research. She knows lots of like niche details. She doesn't f around with like half-assed levels of information. I've never seen her do that.
Yeah, the silly serious. For those who don't know, what do you think? What do you think are Stephen the strengths of?
I think she's like decently nice and all that, but for her, the far outpace everything. She's very, very intelligent. That's the number one thing that I care about.
Okay, I think that's so interesting. When I look at Jo, like some of the first things that I think of why I think she's so brilliant is she is so good at speaking the language of the other person and appealing to them in a way that they will understand. So she like puts her own world behind them and tries to get into theirs. That's like the main thing that I first think of. I agree that she's really intelligent and I agree that she's really well researched as well. But I think there's lots of people that are like that. I think that's what makes her unique to me when I listen to her debate.
Okay.
Would you agree with me?
Not at all, no.
You
But
don't
we
think
just have
that
a
she's good at
different
that?
She might be. I don't know. But my thing for her, she's genuinely one of the best people at reading research, assimilating the information, and then regurgitating it in a way that shows that she has a mastery of the material and can apply it to the situation that we're talking to. She's one of the only people, sadly, that I've had on my stream that seems capable of doing that. That's why I value her. She might also be good at the other things you're saying, but I don't care as much about that.
Okay,
But if she has
thank you.
really-
Yes, that's my point. That's what's
Okay.
really interesting to me, is I don't think Loner does necessarily either. I'm not sure. But I'm curious why you don't care about the thing that I mentioned.
Because that's not what this space is selecting for, is somebody that can like speak the language of the other person and be more whatever. It's like this is a more combative, like debate oriented space, I think.
Yeah, but I'm asking about you. Would you say that when you say this space, does that mean that's what you value?
Well, I mean, I am the creator of this space. So
Yeah.
I think since these are the traits that I exhibit and then the types of things that I value, that the downstream from me, it's going to emulate that. Yeah.
Do you think that if you came to value that part of her as well, that it would drastically change the combative nature of the space? Because she's also
Yes.
very combative.
Yeah. But this goes back to what I just said before, to where you have to change the space to change the downstream. So if I started changing the way that I acted, or I was trying to showcase Joe or have her involved in those conversations, that would be changing the content, changing my demeanor, the demeanors that we're showcasing on stream, and then that would necessarily change the demeanors of the people in the space afterwards, yeah. It would attract different people and change slightly the demeanor of some of the people in here, and then some people would leave, and it would just be like a reshuffle like that, basically, yeah.
What if I didn't say, so sorry, just to make sure, I'm not saying for you to start embodying those things.
For you to value something far different in a way, it is a type of embodiment. Like I don't like if I were to start watching long form videos about painting, I wouldn't have to be a painter to start to embody ideas related to painting. People would come to associate me with it, and you would draw those types of people to watch it. And even if I'm not painting, it would still be like that. The demeanor, I think, of me as like a painter or somebody at least who appreciates painting would start to trickle down.
Okay.
You know, I actually did think of something when she did that video, Silly Serious, about Netanyahu. Right at the beginning, she even says that like this isn't going to be some kind of like clinical like lecture, kind of like all the sources up on the screen, video essay kind of thing. It was going to be like telling a story, even though like all the sources are in the bottom. But yeah, it's just like storytelling with just lots of visuals and stuff like that, and video footage and stuff like that, and. Yeah, I did think, because that's obviously very different from the kind of thing I usually look for. And
Sure, yeah. I guess maybe we might be talking about the same thing in different ways, though. But what you just said is what I would consider what I said, where in order to tell a story about something and not just regurgitate discrete facts, it shows that you have learned material, you've assimilated it, and then you have a mastery of it such that you can apply it to something else. Rather than saying like, oh, yesterday at 5:30, this guy woke up, and then at 6:30 he drove to work, and then at 5:30 he came home, and then at 9:30 he went to sleep. Being able to say like, oh, yesterday he had an ordinary day. He woke up in the morning, he went to work, he had an okay time, he came home, he slept, it was a normal whatever. Like to be able to summarize things with like broader sweeps, but to encompass like all of the smaller details, and like your broader macro summary shows that you have like a mastery, then blah 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 blah. Yeah.
But you also have to like pull people in.
But it's not really. It's not necessarily
right?
like the mastery thing. It's more like it's like the opposite of say like Perrin, his videos like.
Yeah.
And that's like just like a lecture with different segments and very like elaborative on each bit and like very statistical. But yeah, but the way obviously she was telling the story about like the Netanyahu thing, it was just delivered, like a storyteller. So
Yeah.
I think in both cases you have like very strong grasps of the topic and very like deep knowledge and all that. But I'd imagine people would associate like the parent style with a more like masculine thing, and the people would
possibly,
associate
yeah.
the storytelling thing is more feminine. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
I guess so. Then the question is, why would valuing both and saying both are commendable, both are impressive, they're different, obviously, why would that cause you to shift?
Well, I mean, if that's the type of like emotionality that we're talking about, which is like a summarizing of the facts in a narrative way, I mean, I think we would value that.
I think that's like an example of like a.
Well, sure, but now if you're trying to use that as an example, but then also rope that into like empathetic one-on-one conversations where we were like consoling people, that's like a totally different thing now. So I wouldn't like rope these things together.
Yeah, but I don't. I guess I'm having a hard time with this embodiment thing. There's a number of things that other people do that I really respect, and I also don't ever plan to be like that, even though I really respect certain traits of it. I think it's really commendable, and I can tell them, hey, like this is a really cool thing about you, even though I don't have it and I'm not that interested.
Sure. But what is that, or what was that in response to, or what is that?
I guess my understanding, maybe I misunderstood you, is that when I was saying like, why don't you value the thing about Joe that I said, the like understanding, empathy, blah, 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 blah. You're like, well, it's just not the thing that is most salient. And I'm like, I agree. And
Sure.
maybe that's the point here. And you said, well, if I came to value that more, then I would necessarily embody it more, and then the space wouldn't be what the space is.
Yeah,
and I'm saying,
change a
is
lot.
that true?
Yeah, I think so. So, for instance, I like music. I really like Xena. I really enjoy our conversations about music. I could theoretically do a whole month where we literally just do music streams, and we learn stuff, and we talk to Xena, and maybe even pull on other, LonerBox, a guitar player, and we literally just do music, and I play my keyboard and blah, blah, blah. If I did that, my female
You mean
audience
Ziana,
rate,
right?
Xena, yeah, Xena. If I were to bring, if I were to do that, my female to male ratio might change like 30-70. It might dramatically change.
Yeah.
And I haven't necessarily changed myself, but I've changed like the stream demeanor, the overall like demeanor for stream, or the demeanor that I'm presenting, and then necessarily the audience demeanor will change. I think following that.
I don't know if I buy that. I feel like if
if I were to do only music, piano streams and stuff for a month, you don't think the composition of my audience would change?
I don't think that's what I'm asking about. That's not what I'm theorizing about.
Okay.
I'm saying, what if you said on stream, oh yeah, I guess Joe is really good at those things too. Yeah, that's actually really, really commendable. And you started just noticing those things and mentioning them. And again, now this is seeming like I'm making there's like a criticism against you. It's not.
You can criticize. I don't care.
I'm not criticizing
that's
you.
Fine. But when you keep saying,
point.
I don't think you're criticizing me, but when you keep saying I'm not criticizing you, now it feels like you're really criticizing me. I'm not actually sure if I'm being criticized right now. Yeah, just you can say what you want. You're fine.
Anxiety bites again. Okay. Fuck.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying that you don't have to change the demeanor of the stream. You don't even necessarily have to showcase it. You just have to spotlight it a little bit. You just have to mention that, like, oh, this is an appreciable part of this person, that even if it's not part of the stream, like, this is something we can appreciate.
Yeah, or like, what do you think would happen if you did that?
So I think that talk is cheap. I think the only thing that changes what the audience appreciates is behavior. Now, talking is a type of behavior.
Okay, I think I understand.
So, like, if every hour I was to say, like, hey, this person is really cool and they do this thing. Hey, guys, this is blah, blah, blah. Then I think that it would help a little bit because of the behavior of bringing it up. But, like, to truly sell it, you either have to talk about it a lot or showcase it.
For the zeitgeist change, you would have to change it in and of yourself, is what you're saying.
Or have that on stream more or something.
Okay, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Okay, I wasn't understanding that. Maybe that's true. Do you think the nature of the people that like orbit you can also have an effect on this? So say...
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to get into that one because I feel like that is begging for drama.
True. What's wrong with that?
You know what, Loner? You can take it. I just,
No, I don't know what you're saying.
She's saying that the type of women that tend to inhabit this space set negative examples for women and drive off other women that you would want to have in the space. You end up into a self-fulfilling feedback loop of not only enforcing that the space is heavily male-dominated, but enforcing that the types of women that come are the worst types of women that would drive away better women representation, I think is what she said.
Do you think that? Do you think like male orbiters get away with cringe behavior more than the women do?
Absolutely. Anytime you've got a majority character versus a minority character, the minority is always way more on trial than the majority character. Like, it's sad to say, but it's really good that, like, ABBA, for instance, is like as upstanding of an individual as he is, because if ABBA were to like be horrible in any way, size, shape, or form, like, people would make comments not about ABBA but about black people. Like, people would do that. That's just the nature of being a minority figure in a majority space. Yeah. It's really annoying.
Bro, I used to fucking hate that in music scenes when the exact same trait, say like arrogance from a male artist, was always like fucking fetishized. Do you know a band called like the Brian Jonestown Massacre?
Nope.
Like, or I don't know, there's other examples, but basically just men being the most like toxic fucking deluded cunts was just so like valorized. But for a woman, it was like a fucking shred of that was very much just like a huge problem. Like, women always had to be like seen as a bit more humble and shit. Yeah, that was always a really weird thing that I noticed. Yeah.
I think it's also really tough. Like when I'll like introspect here of why I'm really hesitant to talk about it is obviously I'm a woman and an orbiter in this space, which means that anyone hearing me talk about it makes me immediately seem like I'm better than other women, which is not what's happening. The question is basically like, is there a way for the women that are here to at least facilitate among us like a healthier way of engaging with each other, which I think is happening. Like, there are wonderful women, like I'm friends with Erin and Pixie and Lauren. Like, there's a lot of really lovely women in this space as well. But the like comparing and contrasting and like kind of like toxic dynamic that occurs amongst women, and then particularly when that occurs, I think gets like, I don't know if it gets gobbled up more than the viewers. There's something unique that happens there.
There's three different things that happen. Is it one, you're selecting for women that are already more masculine coded, which already makes everything weird. Two, you're selecting behaviorally for women that might engage in pick-me behavior, which is already really fucking weird.
Because of the platform or because of the disagreeableness?
Just because of the traits themselves, and then because of the ways that you buy into those communities, the Uncle Tom or Jane or whatever the fuck you would call pick-me woman or whatever. And then three, I think that the community also picks for that. There's a reason why pick-me women work, and it's because men like pick-me women. So the community starts to push for that type of pressure. And then all three of these things lead to the conclusion of, if an ordinary woman comes into the space, well, the women there are already not like her because they're more masculine coded. And then also the women are pick-me's. So you're in like a really weird queen off. And then the community expects you to act a certain way. So as soon as you come in, people are ranking you against the other women. The men are, like the rating of like, oh, she's hotter than her. Oh, she's blah, 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 blah. And then the other women are looking at you like, I am hotter than you. Oh, this bitch is blah, blah,
really
blah, blah, blah. And then everything is just like super omega fucked. And that's one of those like self-reinforcing things that basically chooses for sometimes the worst types of people. And the community, the women involved, and everybody like drive that. And it's very hard to overcome that when it's already really skewed in terms of ratio.
Yeah, because I feel like one of the most uncomfortable things that I've experienced being in this space is when I'll get consistently compared to like other women orbiters. When I look at our personalities and like the styles of content and stuff that we do, I'm like, we're not really alike that much. Like the only thing that's similar is that we have tits, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
There's no other reason. And I guess, and again, I could be wrong, but I feel like, so this might be my bias of just what I see. Do male orbiters get compared in this way of being like, man, LonerBox and Wicked or LonerBox and IRI are just so much alike, and LonerBox IRI, is just a crappier version of LonerBox. Does that happen as much amongst the men? Because I see it sometimes, right? I've seen like just like get compared to Chud.
Absolutely not. No.
But just like getting compared to Chud is
never.
closer than.
No. People are going to say yes because there might be one or two examples, but in terms of like a serious manner, absolutely not. Nobody has ever said that like LonerBox needs to not come on stream as much because he is a horrible representative of guitar players, of people with curly brown hair, of people of Lebanese descent or Scottish
Stone
or whatever. That
giants.
has never, ever, 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 ever happened. But people will constantly talk about certain women and be like, oh, this is a bad representation of women. It makes no women want to be on stream ever. Like blah, 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 blah. Like, and they'll go like off on stuff like that. Or there's also different treatment towards people based on whether or not they're male or female as well. So for instance, if I think that fighting with Lav is fun, then the constant stream of like, oh, like, this particular woman that Dusty's fighting with, he just wants to fuck her, blah, 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 blah. But then like if Karantos is kept around, then the criticisms are generally focused on Karantos. Or like if STV Philly still has roles and he comes in, like if STV Philly was a woman, people would treat that encounter a lot different than him just being a man.
Yeah.
So like there's like 15 different like factors that like reinforce like all of the types of behavior here. Especially again, once you're starting with a foundation of so few women and so many men, it just like feedbacks into like everything and like fucks everything up really hardcore. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I feel like the comparisons, if they ever happen, are always kind of like tongue in cheek or just like quite positive.
Yes.
Like
that'll literally be what you're saying.
Like
It'll be a
less
joke.
retarded Hassan or a taller Destiny. It's it's never like barely ever. Bad thing,
But it's always like in a favorable tongue in cheek way.
It is.
Like if LonerBox and me get into a big if LonerBox and me were to get into a big disagreement and people genuinely thought that he was like kind of wrong or dumb on something, you would never find posts saying that like LonerBox is like a dumber version of Hassan. That would just never work the other way. It just doesn't. It doesn't fit the cultural like norms at all. Yeah.
God, that would be such a horrible thing to hear from multiple people. Ugh.
Don't worry, you're the only stone giant that we love here, okay?
It's funny that you talk about this space being really masculine and combative and all that, because honestly, from Ohio, I feel like there's a stereotype of like DGGers and all this, like basically, I guess like the stereotype you get from outside of the space is like Call of Duty, fucking women hating, like creepy, fucking edgy shit. But like, honestly, if I were to grade them on a spectrum of like masculine and feminine, I feel like most of the TGGers I met would fall more on the feminine side, like very like nice, friendly, like kind of like a bit demure and all that. Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's probably two things that have changed a lot. Is that one is my audience probably skews a bit older since I've been streaming for a long time, and because we do a little bit more serious political stuff versus kind of like the very younger, very hot progressive like pop politics TikTok stuff. So the audience is going to skew a bit older there for those two reasons: the type of stuff I cover and the age of like me, how long I've been streaming. But like, I bet if I were to stream to, and because I don't play games anymore, but if I was still like a semi-pro SE2 player, and we also did politics on the side, and then we would do meetups and stuff, I bet the audience would skew much younger and much more like gamer type or whatever. But even the gamer stereotype, to be fair, has changed a lot in the past 10 or 15 years as well. Like the people that play Valorant or Overwatch today hate women a lot less than the people that played 1.6 or Brood War or, you know, Diablo or Dota like way back in the day, you know?
I'm actually curious.
Yeah, mid-2000s gamers were fucking demons.
We were, yeah.
Do we know
How
the
the
average
world
age
survived those
of
people?
the canvassers? I
have no idea.
Canvassers.
I'm gonna go brush my teeth and then put my teeth back in. 1 second.
Okay, have fun.
I felt like I was getting early to mid-20s vibes.
Yeah, I was gonna say they felt quite young. I guess. Are you saying early 20s is older versus like 18-year-olds? Can you canvass underage?
Wait. Do you think that the average age was early 20s?
Yeah.
When you say early 20s, what do you mean? Because I thought the average age was probably, I would guess, like 24 to 25, 26.
Oh, I would guess more like 20, 22 would be my guess of the average age there.
Do you have the numbers?
No, I just asked somebody to see if they have the numbers. But no, I don't know.
It would be around that, though. I wouldn't count that as like young, as older.
I wouldn't either. That's why I'm surprised that he's saying that he's like an
that's
older.
like Zoomer. Yeah.
I would agree, actually. I mean, they were all like little cutie patooties for the most part. They were very friendly, very warm. It actually gives me like summer camp vibes, like hardcore. It's like the closest I feel like I've ever been to like summer camp energy being at the canvassing event, which is a good thing. To be clear, I love summer camp energy. I think it's great. Like super community oriented.
It was very soft. Yeah. It was like, that's what I mean. Is like people talk about like, oh, we're too, this is like a too hyper masculine space for fucking women to come into, but like the people in person at least. But maybe that's because people who might be a little bit more bravado online and can give it a different impression to how they are in person. Yeah.
It was also really interesting reflecting with some of the women streamers that came. Is like I experienced pretty minimal like being hit on. Probably in large part, I'm married, I'm older, but also in talking to the staff as well, it seems like the women who were being hit on specifically was exclusively like not streamers and not staff. It seemed like having both like people being a streamer and being staff was like a barrier for that experience, which is really interesting, actually.
Yeah, and my first instinct, maybe this is completely like just a bit too fucking black pilled, is just that that means that people like felt more confident going after people who might not have had like the ability to push back, or like it would have been like there would have been more consequence for trying something on and fucking up. I don't know. That just felt a bit, or just generally being intimidated. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like the intimidation and like the risk of like publicity, right? Like if you hit on a streamer and it goes really, really poorly, she could like blow your shit up a lot more easily than somebody else, because I could like talk about it and like describe the individual if I like so chose to. So that's probably like the biggest thing, is the consequence of like if you fuck up is just so much higher.
Yeah. And I always wonder about like, obviously on stream, the only way you can call out like misogyny is just to do it in kind of the way that would be the worst way to do it in real life, is just to like publicly shame, call out the name, ban them and all that. Whereas like in real life, I feel like if men are doing like cringe shit with women, then the better way is the complete opposite. It's always to like do something like more privately, or like try to be empathetic and make sure they're not like too drunk or anything. Yeah, that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like encouraging just like that kind of behavior, or like discouraging the other behavior, I don't think it necessarily has to be more complicated than just, if something happens, is just mentioning it, maybe just explaining to like a crowd or like the audience on stream like why that's bad, or just, and people can just take that. And but I feel like,
but it's not bad. This is a tricky thing. It's not bad to hit on girls. It's not bad to compliment girls. It's not bad. It's not even bad to compliment a girl and not get the cue to fuck off. What the issue is for the woman is if you experience that, oh my God, 70 times in a row, it just feels alienating. Like nothing about it is bad. It's just at a systemic level, of course it makes them feel alienated and uncomfortable, like obviously.
Yeah, but that's why I just wonder if it's maybe better to just say like, just don't do it in the event. I don't know, but then the price you pay for that is that a potential like romance doesn't happen. Fuck.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that's better than the alternative.
What's going on?
We were just talking about how you were destroying your kitchen
Based.
aggressively.
Great.
Were you
Yeah.
throwing pop cans around?
Yep.
Yeah? I don't believe you. Good engagement, though. Very interesting. Okay. So basically, you think there's probably minimal solution to it, other than probably some things that can happen is women, supporting women in a healthy way. I'm not convinced, but I'll think about it. I feel like I've learned a lot more, and I'm going to brainstorm ideas because I'm not convinced that it's not solvable.
So this is the balance that we're trying to skirt. This is why I think it might not be solvable. If the natural inclination with no bad social pressure, but just with temperament, is to have 90% men, 10% women, if that's the natural draw to this space, then once you start adding in all the social pressure and everything else, can you maintain that equilibrium of 90-10? Or is there always going to be some women that are pushed out in a 90-10 ratio that will cause you to have like 95-5? I don't know if you can maintain that edge of 90-10 if that's the natural draw to the space. That's why I don't know if the problem is intractable. I think there's obvious stuff you can do, like banning not safe for work or certain types of comments or whatever, but that's not going to undo all of the subtle social pressure that pushes some people out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe something that can be slightly alleviated in some places, depending on what issues are popping up. But yeah, which is very different from solving like a big societal or broader issue. But I don't know. I think I think just more open communication about what's happening at each particular time. So it seems to be for this one, it seems to be that maybe no one did anything wrong. It's just that a bunch of people asked people out, but it was just too many at the same time for one or two women, and that was kind of cringe. So yeah, and then I guess that's been brought up, and maybe the lesson that can be learned from that is that at next event, if it's the same demographic, which it probably would be, or so close enough, would be to, I don't know, just try to just remind people that you're not there to top priority there to find a partner. Just just be a bit more chill. Just maybe just to pause every now and then to think about what you're doing and all that. Yeah, I don't know.
But I mean, that's we do market the event socially too, right? So how do you disentangle that? Because part of the draw is the community night, the debate night, the
Cute
getting
girls
together afterwards.
Yeah.
So,
what do you mean you market the event? What does that have to do with what I was saying though?
As in if you're marketing it as a social event and guys and girls are going to be there, are you marketing this as a social event between men and women, but you're not allowed to hit on anybody? It feels like we're trying to draw really stark.
Yeah, a hard line is very imperfect, but yeah, I feel like it's the kind of thing that unfortunately some people are only going to figure out the hard way is just by trial and error, which is kind of cringe. But and the other way is maybe just if that's a concern, maybe just before the thing, one of the streams talking about the event or building up to the event can just be talk about this so that people can have an idea in their head of what might be a good way to approach it. Because at least personally, I think I would imagine there's a difference between going to an event, say a show or a canvassing thing or whatever, with you're specifically there to meet women, and that's kind of your fucking special interest or obsession of being there, right? But whereas if you just remind yourself to take a step back, or you're actually just there to socialize and all that, and if something happens and it's kind of obvious, then go for it. But even just that, I think that can work for people in general.
I think that's only going to work for the type of guys who, to be honest, the girls probably want them hitting on them in the first place, right? That's going to work for really nice, normal guys who are trying to respect women and are probably not at all the problem, right? That's the biggest issue. And the only guys that I think would be capable of ignoring the rule successfully are going to be basically the Giga Chads, or the super weirdos. And so it creates a situation where potentially, because I don't want to be a cockblock. If people find love at a canvassing event, I'm here for it. Okay, if they find a really great one night stand that they both enjoy, I'm here for it.
I don't. I
even
think
if
that's
people
mostly
come just for girls,
true.
I don't know how much I care about that. I just care about the girls not feeling alienated. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's mostly true. But I think what happens is that a lot of nice, well-meaning people or people who actually do mean really well, can sometimes just have a bad day or a slip up, and that might just be because they didn't think about it at the time, or there just hadn't been that thought hadn't been very present, or they hadn't been.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? I feel because I think again, it's like you can't solve everything. You're not going to like stop misogyny like on the planet.
Yeah. No,
But I
no,
think
you
you
won't.
can just like there's like a more regular awareness, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not even misogyny, right? Like thinking women are attractive and like wanting to hit on them isn't hating women at all. In fact, it's probably the opposite. At the worst that it possibly is like the classic like kind of benevolent sexism of like kind of viewing women as like these nice fairy things that you somewhat objectify and like don't really subjectify.
Well, why did you go mute? Did you? Hello?
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 You said subjective, and then it cut out.
I think I just stopped talking.
But you're back now.
Oh. I think I just stopped talking.
Oh, okay. It sounded like you were getting cut off.
Dumbass.
Fuck.
Or maybe
I'm
this is
all
the
good.
training grounds, okay? Because of the ratios, only the true gigastacies can stay and maintain wielding men around their fingers.
Yeah, but the gigastacies are the queens, which are the worst types
I
of...
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The manic pixie dream canvasser.
You need confident gigastacies who don't cut other women down or like cut them out. Because yeah, the ratio element is like there's just no overcoming that. Also, just the average age was like 26, so you win.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Good
26.
Yeah, it was 26.
Yeah, makes sense.
Babies. All right, that's everything I have.
Well.
Okay. I'm gonna fucking leave you guys to it, okay?
I love you, babe.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow.
Any last thoughts?
No, not really. This is a really hard issue to solve because of the natural demographics that the space lends
The
itself
ratio.
towards.
The
and then-
ratio is just so fucked.
Yeah.
It makes it so hard. Because if
Even
there
if
was
you take
100 women and 100 men, they would be. The women would no longer feel predated on. The queen off would be less likely to occur and easier to manage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah, because women don't have any like group dynamics that they can use to fight against like bad women, for instance, right? Like women can't throw bad women out of the community.
No, not at all. Because like
There's not enough.
there's not enough.
And the bad women are bad specifically because they appeal more to the men.
And like when I've done small things of appealing of being like, this person's a piece of shit, like Lav, it often leads to people feeling really, really negative towards me because they are worried that I'm doing the exact queen shit.
That you're accusing of.
Yeah,
So
because
it's
I
just, like,
aesthetically
doesn't-
come across that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's like a losing battle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard one. I don't know. I just try to ban overtly cringe behavior and then we go from there. Yeah.
What about banning overtly cringe behavior from your orbiters? Like, do you think you can? Because I know your relationship with your orbiters is super tricky because you can't control their behavior. Like, there's such a risky power dynamic there all the time.
I've thought about that, but then I end up in like weird model minority areas. I'm not sure if
What
that's
do you mean? Like the banning her because she's a bad woman? Not just 'cause
basically,
she's bad?
yeah. So like, for instance, like I tend to agree with ABBA a lot more than STV Philly. Do I ban STV Philly because I think he might give a bad impression of black people? Like, what message am I sending there? Or do I ban, Lav, because she gives a bad impression of women? Do I ban all the OnlyFans girls because I think they give a bad impression of women? Like, that gets into like really, so then because then we truly do end up in the queen space, or not the queen space, but in the area where it's like maybe you and like Joanne.
Like the elected woman.
Yeah, these are
it's
the
so
two
bad.
women
It's so bad.
representatives that come on.
Yeah, and then how does that how do those two people not just become queens themselves? Like,
Yeah, I don't
through,
know,
like,
it's
perverse
hard.
incentives. What about banning? Do you think that there's any risk? I just to be clear, when I'm going to ask you this, I don't think you do this, but I'm curious what you think.
Sure.
Do you think that you are a bit of like a positivist? So like one form of sexism that I really hate that I don't feel like people talk about as much is like giving women more grace for certain types of behaviors than you would give a man doing the exact same behavior, and assuming again that these behaviors are not like violent things. It's like certain types of like nasty interpersonal behavior. I feel like women a lot of time will get more leeway and infantilized more, and women will often lean into being infantilized for that as like an excuse.
Sure. I mean, like the problem is I think if you show the same amount of grace to men and women, I think people will just still accuse you of doing it more to women. So I don't think I do, but maybe I do subtly and I don't realize it. But I know for a fact, for instance, that if Karantos was a woman, people would make that accusation. If Mr. Girl was a woman, people would have made crazy accusations. If
which is why I'm saying I don't think you do it, because the lead
I
you
understand.
gave Mr.
So
Girl
it's hard to
Karantos
say.
was insane.
Yeah, so it's hard to say. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna keep thinking about it. I don't feel like it's an unsolvable problem.
Okay, well, good luck.
Any other last thoughts of things I should think about as I'm trying to mentally figure this out?
I don't know. I truly don't know for this one. It's a hard one.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay. Be careful.
Bye.
Bye.